Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little after 1, and we have a lot of information to cover today. So I want to first off just thank everybody for coming today. This is the grant writing workshop for the co-op grant program, the Community Outdoor Outreach Program grant. And we'll start off with some introductions and then do some housekeeping things for where you can find documents and talk about questions. But I'll start introducing myself. My name is Carly Blankenship, and I'm the Co-op Grants Manager. I've been with Texas Parks and Wildlife for almost 6 years now. I was the grant coordinator, and now I'm the manager once Cappy retired. And we also have our grant coordinator, Jessica, and I'll let Jessica go ahead and introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Jessica Lagallo, and I'm the co-op grant coordinator, and I've spoken with several of you and got you signed up today. So I thank you for your time, for being here. We are going to be in person around the state. So if you know of other organizations or you yourself would like to do an in-person grant writing workshop, we have a schedule of some of those dates. So thanks for joining us today.
And just so you know, co-op is a small 2-person team, so it's just Jessica and myself, but we do have some other people in our fiscal team and other grant programs in our department. We're called the Recreation Grants Branch. But just for co-op, it's just a 2-person team here. So I'll go over some of the housekeeping items for the webinar today. This will be about 3 hours long. I know that's a little bit long, but we will have a little break and then questions at the end. And then just so you know, everyone is muted on this webinar today, just because I know we're going to have a lot of people attending. If you have any questions, we're going to ask that you use the questions feature in GoToWebinar. So if you look at your little pop-up on the right-hand side, for most people, there's a questions tab in there, and you can just use that, send us questions at any time, and we'll respond to you. And then we'll do a deeper dive into all the Q&As at the very end of this workshop. We also have some handouts for you today that we're going to reference. And if you look in that, just underneath where the questions are in GoToWebinar, there's a little section called handouts. There are 5 documents located in there, and this is everything you need to know and all the supporting documents for the co-op application. So we have an actual PDF of the co-op grant application. Then we have the grant writing workshop slides, and so you don't have to feverishly write down everything. You can just refer to those slides if you want. We also have our program guidance document that we're going to reference throughout this entire webinar today, and this lists all of the eligibility and guidelines for the co-op grant. And then we also have the co-op approved TPWD resources guide in there, and we're going to be talking about TPWD relationships, and this is a resource guide that's about, I think, 6 or so pages long, but it just goes over all of TPWD's resources that are available to you. And then last but not least, we have our SMART goal guidance document. And so when Jessica starts talking about the SMART goals, that is going to be a supporting resource document for you to use. So again, all 5 of those handouts are located in PDF format under the handouts section on your little GoToWebinar thing on the right-hand side of your computer. I also want to mention that this webinar will be recorded and then saved in our resources section of Recreation Grants Online, which is our online database. And so if somebody was not able to attend today, or if you need to leave early, don't worry, it will be recorded so that you can review it at any time. Or if you want to just go back to a certain section to remember what we talked about, that resource will be available as well. The last thing I want to mention before we get started is I want to remind everybody that this is the co-op grant writing workshop for the Community Outdoor Outreach Program grant. And this is really to help support programming, outdoor programming, and this is not a construction grant. So if you thought that you had signed up for a grant program that would support construction or land acquisition or renovating parks, that's really not our program. We have other programs that are all construction within our working group. One is the Local Parks Grant Program, which is park renovations and construction and land acquisition for parks. Then we have a trails construction program, a boating access construction program, and a target range construction program. So we are the only non-construction element. So I just wanted to let everybody know offhand, this is not for construction grants. All right, and with that, I'm gonna go ahead and go over the agenda and we'll get started with this webinar. So the agenda is listed on your screen here. We are going to take a 10-minute break about halfway through. The first portion of this presentation is really going to be the general information and overview of the program, talking about the scoring criteria we're going to use, and then I'll walk you through the Argo system where we accept applications and show you how to apply and how to set up a username in there. And then we're going to take a little 10-minute break, and then Jessica's going to pop on and lead the second half of the webinar where we're going to walk through the actual application itself. So she's going to go through each section and talk about what we're really looking for and give you some tips along the way, how to create the budget, and then also a checklist for some tips of what we're really looking for in certain sections. And then at the very end, we're going to have a question and answer time. But if you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to write them in the questions portion, and we will answer your questions along the way. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off for the program overview portion. So just a little refresher, COOP stands for Community Outdoor Outreach Program, and our entire purpose is to provide grant funding to, that supports programs that engage underrepresented audiences and anything related to Texas parks and wildlife. So that's outdoor recreation, conservation activities, environmental education, just anything you think about with Texas parks and wildlife, that's what our grant supports. This program began in 1996, so we've been around for about 26 years now. It really started with a representative from the DFW area, Representative Davis, and she really charged our agency with saying, hey, you're not doing enough to engage underrepresented audiences in all of your outdoor activities. So we want to try to help fix that. And so instead of trying to create everything in-house and trying to do programs to engage with those underrepresented audiences, they decided it would be best to create a grant program and really tap into those community organizations who already have those relationships around Texas. And so that's when the COOP grant program started. We started just a small $250,000 budget, have been around for 26 years, and the amount of available funding has grown over the years. So this funding, I just want to state that it's all state-funded grants that does not use any federal dollars. So this is all Texas state money. And we receive our funding for these grants via a portion of the sporting goods sales tax collected. So every time you buy kayaks or fishing gear, camping gear, hunting gear, all of that, a portion of those funds come back to support the COOP grant program and other activities throughout the agency. We've also distributed a little under 800 grants over the last 26 years. That totals $24 million, and that's statewide throughout Texas. And so we have a pretty big reach over the years for this program. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the priorities for this grant program. And just so you know, These priorities are listed in much greater detail on page 3 of that program guidance document. So you don't have to write all these down. We do list our priorities as well as defining demographics and so on in our program guidance document on page 3. So these priorities are engaging underrepresented audiences in essentially outdoor recreation, environmental education, and conservation. I want to emphasize the underrepresented audiences part in these priorities. Our underrepresented audiences include female, low income, minority audiences, and individuals with disabilities. Those are our 4 primary target demographics. We're going to go into defining those and talk about those demographics in much greater detail in the second half of this webinar. But I wanted to emphasize that really the main piece behind this grant program is engaging those underrepresented audiences. That's why this program was created in the first place. So if you're meeting some of these other grant priorities, but you're not engaging or focusing on those underrepresented audiences, you may not be very competitive for this particular grant program. Our co-op priorities include outdoor recreation, so providing that high quality participation in outdoor recreation, facilitating the access to some of our sites, providing that environmental and cultural resource education around the state, integrating some of TPWD's education programs into your programs, and then focusing on that conservation element, so citizen participation and stewardship, and then developing the next generation of our natural resource leaders. I will say that you don't need to meet all of these priorities, so most of our projects do not hit every single one of these priorities, but those projects, we're really evaluating those projects on the quality of meeting at least one or more of these priorities. Our emphasis, you're going to hear this throughout the entire presentation, is really on that quality. So that quality of engaging with TPWD and that quality of meeting our priorities. All right, so now some of the details for this grant program. For this particular year, like we said, the money comes from a portion of the sporting goods sales tax, so our budget fluctuates from year to year, but we know we're going to have at least $2 million available in sporting goods sales tax this year to distribute through this program. This year, we have changed our grant award ceiling just a little bit. This has definitely varied over the last few years. Sometimes it's gone down, sometimes it's gone up. Luckily, this year is one of those up cycles. So we fund programs that range between $5,000 and $70,000. So we can't provide you more than $70,000, but that is the cap for this year. I believe last year it was $60,000, so we've gone up a little bit from there. And then a year before that, we had dipped down to, I think, 30. So right now we're on an upward trend, and you can apply for up to $70,000 through this program. To give you an idea on how many people we might fund, this is all based on past programming, but in the past we've had maybe about 70 people apply. And if we're fully funded like that, each year we'll fund about 40 projects. And so it's a very competitive grant program. A little over half of the people are awarded. So I just want to explain to you that, you know, if you don't get a grant when you apply, it may not be your fault. You still have a very great project, but we just have a limited amount of funding, so, and we can't fund everybody. You will have the opportunity to reapply and to ask for a critique, and we can give you some evaluation on where you scored and what might help improve the score for your grants. We do have 2 different options for payments. So this is either a reimbursement grant or it's an advance payment grant. This is a little bit new. If you haven't applied in the last maybe two or 3 years, this is a new option. And so reimbursement means that you would need to purchase those items up front and then provide all that backup documentation, and we would pay you for those funds. That's the typical way we've operated, and that's still an option for this year. But we have now also included an advance payment option where you can request up to 3 months of expenses towards your grant, and then you would provide all of that backup documentation, that receipt and proof of payment. After the fact, we would pay you, and then you could, once you've provided all the documentation, you could come back and request another advance for those funds. So this definitely helps those smaller organizations who may not have a lot of that internal cash flow. The advanced option is available. This year we do have a November 1 deadline. This is a hard deadline, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time on November 1st, and no exceptions after this. So we always tell people, start your grant applications early and submit it early. Confirm that with us that it's been submitted if you don't receive that confirmation email, because there's just no exceptions. This is a very competitive program. We can tell if you just started an application, 20 minutes before the deadline. We can see that in our system. So technical glitches happen all the time. We just want to tell everybody to get started well in advance. And then we will announce all of these grants on March 1st. You'll receive an announcement via email. And so you'll want to make sure not to include any grant supported activities before that March 1 announcement, because that will be the first day of that grant period. So what projects are eligible? Essentially for this program, you just need to be a tax-exempt organization. So that includes any municipality, universities, school districts, nonprofits, churches. Who am I missing here? Anybody who's tax-exempt for those is eligible to apply. You also need to be in good standing with SAM, which stands for System of Award Management, and the Texas Comptroller. So if you owe money to the state of Texas, or if you owe money to the federal government, that means you're not in good standing. And just to clarify, we're going to go over the System for Award Management a little bit further later on, but you'll just need to make sure you're in good standing. You'll also need to submit a signed resolution giving authorization for applying for this grant program. We're going to, again, go over the resolution in much greater detail in part 2 of that when we actually start going through the application. And then if you received a grant last year, you will not be eligible to apply. You won't be eligible to apply until next year. So any past grants have to be closed by the time you apply. And then we can only award 1 grant per entity. So you can't apply multiple times this year for different projects. And then one more eligibility that we like to put on a separate page because we feel this is really important. So one eligibility factor is that you have at least 1 direct relationship to Texas Parks and Wildlife when you apply. And the reason being is this is the whole reason the grant program was started, was to diversify audiences engaged with our agency. And so projects that don't directly have that relationship with the agency, that doesn't really go with our mission. So we thought it was important enough to where it's an actual eligibility fact here. And again, we're going to go into this in much greater detail in part 2 of what qualifies for a direct relationship to Texas Parks and Wildlife. But essentially that's having your participants visit TPWD facilities, incorporating TPWD education and outreach programs into your activities, or engaging your participants with our TPWD staff. So maybe a game warden comes out and talks about what they do, or a biologist comes out and leads a lesson for you. I do want to say that you don't need to include all of these different relationships into your program, just a minimum of 1. And the scoring is really going to be based off the quality of these relationships rather than the quality. I also want to mention that not all of your activities for this grant have to take place at a state park or use one of these programs. Again, you just need to have 1, but you can have other programs that are, let's say, going to a nature center or a zoo, or going to a local park where they host their programs. Not everything has to take part at a TPWD site. All right, now I'm going to go into the different types of activities that we can support with this grant program. I'm going to refer you to page 4 of the program guidance document, outlines these in greater detail. I will say that this is not an exhaustive list. There's new things that pop up every year that either didn't exist or we didn't know about. Stand-up paddleboarding is one of those things. It wasn't always an outdoor recreation activity, and then it became so, and so we added it to our supported activities. So if there's anything not listed here that you have a question about, if it would be supported, just reach out to Jessica or myself and we can tell you if it would be allowed or not. But basically these activities are anything you would associate with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So archery, birding, camping, caving, conservation projects, TPWD related cultural resources, environmental science projects, trail riding, fishing, hiking, mountain biking, rock climbing, all of those things that our agency is engaged with, that's what we like to support for this program. And what's not supported, again, this is outlined on page 4 of your program guidance. Any sort of construction projects or exhibits we can't do. Again, we have other programs within our department that focus on construction and exhibits. Any indoor classroom only projects, we want there to be a hands-on outdoor component to that. So if it's strictly an indoor classroom project, it's probably not going to be eligible. Landscaping, marketing campaigns, any out-of-state travel is not eligible. Everything needs to take place in Texas. So if you're also taking your participants to, let's say, Glacier National Park or anything outside the state of Texas, that's fine. Just our grant cannot support those activities or any expenses associated with that out-of-state portion. We can support you right up until you cross that line. Like, if you're doing an event where you're stopping in Amarillo to do some programming, and then after that you head on to Rocky Mountain National Park, we can support that Amarillo event, but we can't support anything outside of our border. Research projects we don't fund. And then our biggest thing that is often included in applications that we can't fund is hosting special events or hosting community festivals that are open to the general public. And the main reason for this is that this program requires you report on the demographics actually served in your events. And when you host an event that's open to the general public, like an Earth Day event or some event where people just show up the day of, it's really difficult in your grant application to know what demographics you're going to be serving, and also you have no way of collecting that demographics from the people who actually attended that event. So for that reason, we just don't allow those for our particular program. And we'll go into demographics much further later on, but we don't accept general census data, so that's another reason why we just don't accept that type of event. We don't allow you to host a tournament or a competitive event. Your participants can absolutely go to a tournament that's not supported by you or that's not put on by you, and we can pay for the cost for them. Like, let's say you're training them every month, and then at the end of the grant, they're going to go to a tournament. We can absolutely support that. We just can't support you hosting that tournament. And then we don't support any sort of traditional sports, baseball, football, soccer, volleyball, any of those things that don't really fully align with TPWD's mission are not eligible. And then what expenses can we purchase? Again, this is anything needed to run your particular program. So we can support any of the personnel and contractors needed. So that includes salary, hourly, part-time, seasonal, contract, intern, stipend and participants, substitute teachers. So if you're working with schools and they need substitute to cover the classroom during the field trip, we can absolutely support that as well. And then we'll also support food and travel. So if you need food for your overnight events, or if you need boxed lunches, that's absolutely eligible. Any of those travel expenses, so mileage, gas, bus transportation is a really common thing, or renting a 15-passenger vehicle to transport your participants to a park, absolutely all of that is covered. We'll also support your different fees that are required to run your program. So any of those entrance or camping fees, any of those program fees that you have to pay to somebody else to lead that program for you, that's all eligible. Any of the lodging required. So if you are going to a training and need hotel lodging, that's eligible. If you are reserving a cabin at a state park, that's all eligible. And then any training that's directly related to grant activities. So that professional development, if you need to send your staff to first aid training or wilderness first aid training, or if you're leading rock climbing programs and you need to send them to a rock climbing certification, all of that is eligible. And then last in that section, participant liability insurance, and that's for the liability insurance to actually support those participants. We don't support other types of insurance like directors and officers insurance or vehicle insurance or property insurance. None of that is allowed, but that specific participant liability insurance is allowed, as we want to make sure that our organization and your organization are covered in case anybody gets hurt. And then if you have a service project included in this, and it has to be all outdoor and natural resource related, any of the expenses covered with that are eligible, such as the plants or shovels, gloves, water bottles, anything like that is eligible. And then we'll also provide you with supplies and equipment if you want to include that as well. That's usually one of our biggest expenses that people applied for. So all of that camping equipment and so on. And that supplies and equipment, that really talks about the outdoor recreation gear. So your tents, your sleeping bags, your hunting equipment, rock climbing harnesses, all of that is covered under there. Since individuals with disability is one of our target demographics, you can absolutely have that adaptive equipment needed to run that program. So that can include tandem bikes, hand pedal bikes, stabilizers for kayaks, archery support for limited mobility participants, fishing and shooting mounts, braille documents. There's a variety of different adaptive programs out there and supporting equipment needed to run those programs. And so you can absolutely include that in your budget. I know a lot of that equipment can be pretty pricey. And so this grant will help support that equipment. And I also want to mention too that if your project is serving the audience and needs ASL signers or guides for visually impaired, that can absolutely be covered under the personnel section. And then if you need any computers or electronics, such as tablets associated with this program, you can absolutely include that as long as they're directly related to this project that's being supported by the grant. And then environmental education materials like iPads, telescopes, water testing equipment, all of that, any of those guides like tree guides or animal guides, all of that's included as well. And then educational trunks can be supported. I know a lot of this particular expenses can get pretty pricey too, like those skulls, skins, and tracks. You can either buy those individually or you can buy those as a pre-prepared educational trunk from some people sell it that way. All of that is allowed as well. And then finally under that section is the safety gear needed to run your program. So if you need life jackets, t-shirts to identify your participants, water bottles or first aid supplies, all of that is eligible. And what's not eligible, these are all outlined on page 11 of the program guidance document. I'm not going to go through every single one of these ineligible expenses, but I'll go through some of the things that we see most often. So the first is probably the curriculum development and design. This can get pretty pricey. We want to make sure that we're not just supporting the curriculum development, that most of the project is actually that work with participants. So we want to make sure that, you know, over half of your project is really focused on implementing that with participants, and that's really the focus. But some of that can be for curriculum development. That's why we have a little asterisk there. We also cannot support exhibits. So if you have a museum or a nature center, or if you're a friends of group with a park, we can't support any exhibits for that. We kind of consider that infrastructure and we can't support infrastructure. Along those lines, we cannot support facility construction. So if you need a gazebo or if you're trying to develop a park or any of that kind of equipment, we cannot support that. We will actually support the programming cost once you have that in place with participants. That's what we would support. And then any indirect costs are not allowed, so we cannot support any of your general overhead. If you have costs like for personnel to submit reports, we consider that direct operating costs, but we can't support any of your other indirect overhead costs. And then like I had mentioned earlier, we can support participant liability insurance, but we cannot support that D&O or vehicle or property insurance. Anything that falls out of the grant agreement, if awarded, so those pre and post agreement costs are not allowed, so they all have to fit into our period of performance, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But you just want to make sure that none of your events or purchases are made before March 1st of when the announcements are, the grants are announced. And then storage, we cannot support any rented or purchased storage for buildings, boat storage, vehicle storage. We can't do any of that. And then we do have a line here for supplies given directly to participants. This has to do with grant rules that are out of our control, but since this is all government funding, these items cannot really benefit individuals per se. So you cannot purchase, let's say, outdoor recreation gear or anything like that and then give it to participants to keep after that event. It has to remain with the program. There are some exceptions to this. So what we consider safety gear, like reusable water bottles or t-shirts that you may use to identify your participants during events, or hats, bandanas, sunglasses, that kind of thing, we consider safety equipment, and those can be given to participants. But typically all of the gear purchased, and that includes like fishing tackle boxes and all of that, has to remain with the program and cannot be given to participants. And I'll also say that we don't allow you to purchase like state park passes and give them to individual participants to use outside of the grant. You can have your actual staff of your organization. We can support those for your staff who use them during the events, but they can't be given to your participants to keep and use later on. And then the last thing I'll highlight here is that we can't support any sort of purchase of vehicles or motorboats for this. None of those really high ticket items are allowed. Again, all of these items are listed on page 11 of your program guidance if you want that for reference. All right, moving along, we're going to go over the timeline for these grants, and this is a very exciting timeline. Our applications open on August 1, which is Monday. And so if you try to log into the system now and start your application, you will not find it in our system, but that will open at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. And so you will have full access to the application next week. And then very important as well, the application deadline to apply is November 1st at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you're in the El Paso area, just remember it's Central Standard Time. No exceptions beyond that. The system actually shuts down and you are unable to hit that submit button right at 5 o'clock. So just make sure you submit those applications very early. And then we will announce these grants on March 1st, the morning of March 1st in 2023. And if you are awarded a grant, or if you're not, you're going to receive an email. We'll notify you either way. And those are all done via email notifications through our Recreation Grants Online system. So you'll want to make sure that whoever's listed in our system as the main person, they're who's going to get those emails. And you want to make sure that they're not being filtered to your spam or cluttered folder. So you want to make sure you're actually getting those notifications. And then if you're awarded a grant, we will host a grant management webinar to go through all the logistics as far as reporting, eligibility of items, how to submit a reimbursement or an advance payment request, all of those logistics for managing a grant. It will be through a webinar in late March of 2023. So we used to host these in person. Due to COVID, it all switched to webinar, and then we realized that, hey, these are much better in webinar format. We're not going to force everybody to travel to the Austin area for these. So you don't need to include any expenses in your budget for traveling to Austin for this grant management workshop anymore. It's all done via webinar. And then if awarded a grant, your agreement period will be from March 1st of 2023 until September 1st of 2024. So that's an 18-month window to implement your programs. Keep in mind that if you hosted events or purchased supplies before that March 1 start date, they are not allowed, as we cannot award any pre-agreement expenses. So all activities in your budget have to fall within this 18-month window. Some projects may have the ability to extend an additional 6 months after that, but you don't want to include that additional 6 months in your application. So you want to make sure that all proposed activities are within this 18-month window. And then if you're awarded a grant, you'll also be required to submit a quarterly report through our Argo system every 3 months. The first one will be due on July 30th. These are due on the 30th quarterly. And so it's July 30th, let's see, October 30th, January 30th, and April 30th are the deadlines for that. And then you'll also be required to submit a comprehensive final report 45 days after that grant period ends, or whenever you've wrapped up all your activities. So just 45 days after the end of your grant period, you'll submit a comprehensive report listing everything you did. Next up is our scoring criteria. These are listed on page 6 of your program guidance document, and I'm not going to go over these in a super great amount of detail. I'm going to give you just an overview of what the scoring criteria is. Mainly because we don't want projects modifying all of your project activities just to try to score points. We want to know what's really feasible and what aligns with your intent from your organization. But I will go over these in a little bit of overview. So there is a 100-point scoring for co-op projects. 15 points are based on the co-op priorities that are listed in our program guidance document. So we're really talking about the quality and how well you're aligning with one or more of our co-op priorities. Another 30 points is for how well you're serving our underserved populations that we identified. So those are 4 demographics: that low income, female, minority, individuals with disability. Those are our populations, so we want to know how well you're serving those audiences and the assurances that those demographics are actually going to be served by your program. And then next up, 30 points is for the expected impact to those participants. So is this going to be a one-time activity for 30 minutes, or are those participants really engaged in in-depth, meaningful experiences that they might be likely to continue in the future after these grant activities end? So we're evaluating that overall expected impact to your participants. And then next up is 20 points for the timeline and budget. So we want to make sure that you have a fully planned timeline listed on the application and that it's fully understandable and aligns with the rest of your application. And same with your budget. We want to make sure you've really thought about what expenses you want and that they align with everything else that was submitted in the application. And then finally, there's 5 points for organizational capacity, and we're just making sure that you have the staff needed to run these programs effectively, and that everything is well planned out, and that you're going to continue these activities. You're not just going to sell off all the equipment when the grant is finished. The overarching theme for our scoring criteria is really based on quality over quantity. That hasn't always been the case. We did a major scoring criteria change about 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and we're really we really started focusing more on that quality. So it doesn't matter if you're serving 1,000 participants. So a project that might be serving 1,000 participants for a 1-hour experience may not score quite as high as somebody serving 15 participants over an entire year weekly in different in-depth quality outdoor recreation experiences. So that program serving less participants but more in-depth is probably going to be a little bit more competitive to those one-time experiences. Again, a lot of the emphasis here is also on serving our underrepresented audiences and the overall impact to participants. So next up, we just want to talk about some of the organizational capacity issues that we see and some tips to see if this is really a good grant program that aligns with your needs and your internal structure. So we want to tell you some of these things just up front so that you're prepared and to see if it's a really great fit. So first up, I'll start off with the timeline. Like I had mentioned earlier, the grant really will start on March 1 of 2023 and no activities can be supported before that. So if you're proposing spring events, that can be a little bit challenging because we can't support any purchases before that March 1. So you would have to wait until the grant started on March 1 to purchase all of that outdoor recreation gear or make your reservations for the event. So we often see that some projects that had their first event starting on March 10th, it was really difficult because they either couldn't get their seed money advance in time or they just didn't have enough time to fully coordinate all of those logistics since they weren't notified until March 1. So just keep that in mind. Next time is the payment function, and this is to really gauge if you have the internal capacity to deal with either a reimbursement or an advanced payment option that we offer. So within our group, it takes a little while to process payments, and I'll be very upfront about that. We say that payments, they will take up to 30 days to process on our end after you submit it, and that's not taking into account if you didn't provide all the backup documentation and we needed to get additional information from you. And so we wanted to keep you just aware of that if you don't have that internal cash flow, you need to kind of build that into your timeline, that if you need to space out those events a little bit longer to account for getting paid for the prior event before you can make all your reservations or purchase all the items for your next event because you don't have a lot of cash flow, just keep all that in mind as it can take 30 days to get those payments and longer if we don't have all the information we need. Also with those payments, we need, no matter if you do a reimbursement or an advanced payment option, you're going to be required to submit all the invoices as well as proof of payment. So showing that, hey, it actually hit your bank statement. You're going to have to provide those two things for every single receipt that you have. And so just keep that in mind that it's a lot of, some of these packages for reimbursements can be pretty large. So do you have the administrative capacity to compile all that information when you're going to get your money? Also, there's a reporting burden. So we are required to do quarterly reports that track your demographics for the people you serve. Do you have the internal capacity to do that on a quarterly basis? And do you have the capacity to track how many participants came to each event? So just kind of keep that in mind. And then next up is weather and cancellations. These are mostly outdoor events, so keep in mind that weather happens, hurricanes happen, all of that just happens. So build in a little bit of cushion in your projects, expecting that sometimes it's just not safe to take 30 people camping, especially that are kids, in really stormy weather. Sometimes that's just not safe or the best experience for those participants. So build in some contingency plans for weather. Also, there's a lot of staff turnover that happens. So what's going to happen if you have some staff turnover in your organizations? So in general, we recommend that projects be conservative in their estimates of what they're proposing. Don't shoot for the moon. Don't shoot for the best case scenario. it's always best to propose kind of that middle ground, and then if you over deliver, that's much better than over promising. So just be conservative in what you're proposing, and keep in mind that whatever scope of work that you include in these grants, we're going to hold you to that scope of work. So that then transfers over to a grant agreement if you're awarded a grant, and we're going to require that you complete that grant as proposed. We know a few things happen, so if there's some small changes here and there, there's some flexibility, but if you said you're going to do 20 camping events, we're going to hold you to close to 20 events. So if you actually end up doing 3 or 4, you may not meet what our expectations for what you delivered in the grant. And also there will be deductions in place if you don't meet those expectations by the end of the grant. So if you don't meet the demographics for the audiences you served, or you don't meet your SMART goals that you proposed, or if you were budgeted $70,000 but you only spent $30,000, there may be some deductions in place if you decide to reapply for the program. All right, next up, I'm going to walk you through how to apply for the grant, and then after this, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to dive into the next section of walking through the application itself. But first up is we do not accept any paper applications for this grant program. Everything is done online nowadays. So our website is listed on here, and if you download that PDF of the application or of the slides from today, you can actually click on that link and it'll take you directly to our website. The other option is I'm going to go ahead and screen share here, so bear with me. All right, so one of the other easiest ways to get to our website is if you just Google Co-op TPWD. We are usually the first website to pop up here. So this is Co-op's website. If you're interested in some of our other recreation grants program, you can click on this link in the top left, and it'll go over all the different programs and links to their website for what we offer. But this is Co-op's grant website. There's a little bit of information about the program listed here. If you want to check out our scoring criteria, we have a link. If you want to check out our FAQs, we have some FAQs there as well. And then this grant deadline just goes over all the grant deadlines for all of our programs. And then if you click on this Apply Manage link, it will take you to a link for our Recreation Grants Online portal. And so you can click on this link and it'll take you right there. I'll tell you that we all refer to it as Argo. So if you ever hear Argo thrown out or see Argo 2020 or anything like that, we're just referencing this grant portal here. So once you click on this link, it'll take you to this sign-in page. So there's a few things you need to do to get started. If you have applied to a grant in the past, since 2020, so in the past 3 years, I believe it was if you submitted a grant in the, let's see, if you were awarded a grant in March of 2020, you would have applied in the system. If you have done any of that in our system, then you probably already have an account to this Argo system. But before 2020, we used a completely different system. We had to migrate to this new one. So if you had applied in our old system, you do not have a username and account in this new system, and you'll need to create a new one. We're sorry about that, but we just couldn't transfer everybody over to the system. So in order to create a new user account to the system, you'll just, over in this login box, you'll click that new user link. And then you'll just complete your name, your title, email, then you'll create your username and your password. And then you'll need to select your organization from this list. So if your organization already has an account in this Argo system, you will be listed here, and you can just select that name from the system. However, if your organization does not have, if you cannot find it anywhere in this drop-down box, then you will just need to click this box for My Organization is not listed. And then you'll also list your role. So if you're the one who's going to be submitting the application, you will need the full sponsor administrator role. If you just want to help write some of the grant, but you're actually not going to be submitting it, you can choose the staff role. And if you want some other staff just to be able to view that information, but they can't modify anything, then you would choose that sponsor viewer role. So you would do that. I'm going to pretend in this case that my organization is not listed. And if that's the case, then a whole bunch of other information will pop up so that you can actually create your organization's account. So the first part is to create your individual user account. The second part that pops up here is to create that organization account. So you'll just fill out some of the basic information, that name, your address of where your headquarters is located, your phone number, website, and then you'll get down to this tax-exempt EIN number. So if you're a government entity, you'll enter that number under this taxpayer ID number. However, if you're a nonprofit and have an EIN number, that's a different number of digits associated with it, you'll enter it here. And whichever one you don't use, you'll just want to make sure you fill in with 9s. Otherwise, it won't let you submit. And then you'll also update your DUNS and your UEI number. So UEI is something different that has been just instituted within the last year or so. And we're going to go over it in detail when Jessica starts walking through the application, but we do have a resource document. If you don't know your UEI or you don't have one, then Jessica will go over how to create one of those. And then you'll enter this information and then hit save and submit, and it will submit that request. Our systems administrator will approve it for you, and then you'll receive an email and have full access to your account. Once you have full access to your account, then you can go ahead and log in here. I'm going to log in. First of all, if you already have an account and just can't remember your password, you can click the forgot username or forgot password link, and it'll walk you through that. It'll send you an email and walk you through that process. But once you have everything set up, then you can go to the login area here. And if you're ready to start your application, you can go to the view available opportunities, and the co-op will appear. Right now, because the application does not open until Monday, the co-op is not listed here, but our local parks grant program does have an application, so this is what it'll look like. So on Monday, after Monday, once it's up and running, you'll just hit the Apply Now button, and it will take you to the actual online application. You will be able to save and then come back to your application once you've saved. Just to let you know, I always recommend working offline in, let's say, a Word document, and then copying and pasting things over when it's time, especially for that narrative section or an overview or the budget, just because the system will time out after about 10 minutes or so. So you just want to either make sure you're hitting save frequently or work outside of the system and then come back in, copy and paste things over, and then hit save frequently. But that save button, we just want to really emphasize, hit that often. If you have already started, if you had already clicked this apply now and started an application, when you come back to work on it again, you do not need to go to this opportunities section and hit apply now. That will actually generate another application, and you're going to be capped at doing that twice. So that's not how you go to your page. Instead, you will just go to your home page, and in your My Tasks area, your task for that open application will appear in this section. So then you can just apply on the link under name, and it will take you to the application that you had already started. Another thing I wanted to mention is our resources section here, and you actually do not need a username to log in and view these resources. Before you log in, I think it's in the top left-hand corner, there's a button for Argo 2020 resources you can click on, but if you are logged in, it's on the right-hand side here, so just click Argo 2020 resources, and there's a few different areas that will help you out. It lists all of our different grant programs here, but you can scroll down for a quick start user guide. So if you need help trying to figure out how to create an account or how to start an application, how to submit your application, how to add new users to your application, you can click on this quick start user guide link, and there's PDF and video tutorials for all of those things that you need to do there. Also, if you do receive a grant and you're awarded a grant, we have a section for awarded projects that go over things like how to sign your grant agreement and submit it, how to submit a reimbursement questions. We have some resources there as well. But if you're applying specifically for the co-op grant program, you can click on these co-op grant program resources, and you will see all the different resources available to help you apply for this grant program. So this first section is for applying to the grant. And so it's things like that 2023 PDF grant application template, so you can see what questions are asked. Our PowerPoint presentation from today will be available. All of those resources that we have in the handout section are available here. If you want to see templates of the resolution for either a nonprofit or a government, we have those there. If you want to see templates of partnership letters, we have those here as well. A budget template, a budget sample, our program guidance that we've referenced all throughout are listed here as well. So we have a lot of different resources available. And then if you receive a grant, we have some co-op specific resources available at the bottom, but right now you don't need to worry about those. So just keep in mind of those resource sections. If you can't find how to, if you can't figure out how to find that program guidance document, everything's listed in this resource section. All right, so bear with me for one more minute here. All right, so that's everything to do with the Recreation Grants Online portal. Again, you can create a user account there. You can view the available opportunities. Co-ops will be available on Monday, and then you can actually start and submit your co-op application. And then with that, we are going to take a 10-minute break here before we pop it over to Jessica. And so we're going to come back at about 2:10 or so, and then Jessica will actually start walking through the application for you. So we're going to put ourselves on mute. We will answer questions in the question box if you have questions during this time, or you can just go ahead and take your break now. So thank you very much, and see you at 2:10.
Upper behavioral health program.
All right, welcome back. I hope you had a good break. I know this is a lot of information to take in. Just a reminder that you can ask questions as we go along. Carly's going to be answering those in real time, so you'll get some answers. But we'll also have time at the end of this presentation for some questions and answers. So if you feel more comfortable asking your questions that way. So part 2 of our grant writing workshop, this is going to dive into the actual grant application process. You have a blank application as part of your handouts. So if you'd like to open that and follow along, but I will also have parts of the application up on our screen. So we will start with a general overview of the application, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the more critical elements of the actual application. We'll have a little bit of practice with some polls. We'll be giving some tips and best practices in different elements of the application. And we'll also look at several examples, and we're going to help you get ready for your own application. So let's get to it. All right, so this is part 2 of our grant writing workshop, the grant application process. And let's go ahead and take a look at the application. So as Carly mentioned, the co-op application will be available in our Argo system on August 1st. For now, you have a blank paper copy in your handouts, but remember that the actual application does need to be submitted electronically in that Argo system that she referenced earlier. So let's take kind of a big picture look at the 6 sections that make up our application. You can see the first 3 sections. We have general information, applicant information, acknowledgements, eligibility, and legal. Carly already went over a few of these, but I will highlight a few items to note that you will need to complete with your application. She had mentioned the unique identity identifier, the UEI number. On your actual application, there will be a link on the actual application right here that you can click, and it will give you a very simple step-by-step process on how to obtain that UEI number. So those of you familiar with previous applications, please note this is not your DUNS number. There is no more DUNS number. If you have a current account in our Argo system with a previous application, you will need to log into your account and replace that DUNS number with this new UEI number. So if you have no idea what either of those are, that is totally okay. Just click on that link. It will take you directly to the System for Award Management, that SAM site, where you can go and get your number. You are not required to complete the full registration, and it's a pretty quick and simple process. The SAM registration here is optional. You will want to make sure you're in good standing in that SAM system. However, you don't need to do the entire active registration account in that SAM system. If you don't have an account, you can just enter 99999. And then you also would need your tax ID number. Only complete one, depending on what type of entity you are. Enter 9s if you are a type of entity that doesn't have that tax ID or EIN, but you will need to upload a copy of your IRS determination letter. So that's something you could probably work on now. You will also need an authorizing resolution, and we do have a couple samples within the application. It has to be signed and dated and include that authorization signature. Some of you may have submitted this before, but we do ask that you submit a new resolution with this year's date, signed and dated, and include the authorization to submit with the primary contact of your organization. For some municipalities, this could be a city council. For schools, this could be a principal or a superintendent. For a nonprofit, this might be your executive director or board, but whoever your authorizing agent is for your organization. And last but not least, we have our AP 152 TINs. Again, if you have never heard of these, that's completely okay. This particular number is required to set up your organization in our financial system, and it's just a quick form. So the first three elements of the application are very administrative, general information about your organization, information about who's filling out the grant application, and some acknowledgments and eligibility and legal type of things. You do want to make sure you've read the co-op program guidance document. The grant application will ask you that, and that you've reviewed the TPWD resources and you confirm you have at least one agency resource. Okay. We are really going to spend the most time this afternoon on kind of the meat of the grant, sections 4, where it says project information. We're going to take a look specifically at project description and look at some best practices and what we're looking for in these sections. We're also going to look at section 5, the proposed project details. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline of your project, and then we'll dive into how to count participants, specifically unduplicated participants. And we'll talk a little bit more about demographics, and we'll take a look at a sample budget. All right, so here we go. If you have the blank application in front of you, that's great. This is section 4. If you don't, you can look at my screen here. This is the part of the application where we're looking at key personnel for your project. This may not seem like a critical part of the application, but this is a part of the application that some folks overlook. What they're asking for here is to list the key personnel that are directly involved with your project. So your executive director or president of your organization, they may not be listed here. What we're looking for here are folks that are directly involved with the project. And this becomes even more important if you are asking for funding for personnel. So at the end of this section, we'll talk about budget. You want to make sure if you're listing personnel in your budget, that they are listed here under project key personnel. So let's take a quick look. It's just 5 points in terms of scoring. But as Carly said, this is a very competitive grant, and it's not uncommon for a project to not be awarded by just a point or two sometimes. So this is an easy enough section. Every point counts. You're going to be listing any personnel that provide direct support to your grant project. You will need to include a short little blurb on their qualifications and what their grant project related duties are. It doesn't have to be lengthy. We're not looking for, their full advertised job description. It could list any degrees that they are required or certifications or just an explanation of what they'll be doing to support the project. A good example might be if you're listing a project coordinator. In that section where it says summary, you might write something like project coordinator handles logistics for camping events, recruiting participants, and will be the primary leader of campouts. So remember, you're only listing personnel who directly support your grant proposal projects. Make sure that you're kind of thinking ahead to your budget. And if you are requesting grant funding for personnel, you absolutely need to be sure that they are listed in this section. Now, some of you may have temporary or seasonal, or you may even have vacancies. If you have a vacant position, where it says name, you can just put to be hired in the name box, and then fill in the title and then the duties of what that vacant position would be doing in relation to the grant. So, easy section here that some folks tend to overlook. That's the project key personnel section on the application. All right, now we're going to take a deeper dive into your actual project description. And this is where a large portion of your project is scored by our committee. You want to make sure all of these elements are aligned. So the key takeaway here is to be clear and consistent through each section of this project description. So this introduces your proposed project. You'll begin by just listing your project name, and I encourage you to get creative with the project name. We don't necessarily want to see co-op project, but maybe something that better describes your actual project description. Then next we have a project overview. This is essentially, if you know what like an elevator pitch is, this section introduces your proposed project, beginning with your name, your project name, and then the brief overview that describes your project. This isn't really a history of your organization. You're not necessarily justifying why being outdoors is good for kids. This is kind of your elevator pitch, a brief summary of what you're proposing. All right, the next section is a big one. You've heard Carly talk about this before, but the application is asking for SMART goals. And I'd like you to think about this as kind of the expected deliverables. This might be the most misunderstood element of the application. The project SMART goals, they represent the outcomes of your project in a very specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely format. Now, you do have a small tutorial in your handouts that specifically address how to write these SMART goals. You'll see a couple examples that are actually listed in the application. And we're going to do a little practice here too. So these SMART goals should describe the measurable outcomes of your project. We should be able to read these goals and understand the deliverables of what will be accomplished in your project. So you may want to include numerical goals. So there's an example here. Coordinate 5 weekend camping trips in the spring to Houston area state parks, connecting 100 low-income female participants. What we do sometimes see that doesn't really follow this format would be phrases like, we are going to increase the knowledge and understanding of the outdoors. So when I read that aloud, that's not really a measurable SMART goal. We can't be 6 months into your grant and measure some type of progress or kind of see where you're at in your grant. If you simply state you are increasing knowledge, another example you would not want to include to develop a generation of environmental leaders, right? That is not specific, it's not really measurable, and it doesn't really have any type of outcome. So think about how you can measure and track progress within these SMART goals. Again, these SMART goals that you are listing under this section in your project description, these will be included in your grant agreement if you are awarded a grant. It's really important that you are realistic. As Carly mentioned earlier, the grant period starts March 1st. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself enough time for any kind of spring activities. You want to make sure that the numbers that you are estimating are also realistic. If your project has multiple aspects to it, let's say your project has a summer camp portion during the summer, and then maybe an after-school program during the school year, and then you have a few weekend camping trips. Each aspect of your project, if you have multiple aspects, should have its own goal. So again, I really encourage you to refer to that SMART goal guidance document that we've included in your handouts. When you sit down to write these goals, just print out or have that handout up on your screen, and that's going to help you quite a bit. So a couple tips here. Again, make sure you kind of get creative with your name. Remember that the summary is just your elevator pitch. Be clear, be concise. We don't really need you to explain why being outside is good for kids, because we already know that. And your SMART goals should include each aspect of your project. And remember that all parts of this should be aligned. So in your overview, if you are talking about a summer camp and an after-school program, and then in your SMART goals, you have a goal about archery, you want to make sure all parts of your project are aligned. So we're going to take a quick look at some practice SMART goals. We're going to have a little poll in a moment. This is a sample of our SMART goal handout, and we'll take a look at a sample. And as I read through this, see if you can kind of identify where this goal is specific, how it's measurable, if it's attainable, realistic, and if there's kind of a timeline set to it. So our sample here says create a year-round, minimum of 8 hours a month, student-led mentoring program where 20 program alumni train 40 middle school girls in outdoor recreation skills such as fishing, archery, backpacking, kayaking, and mountain biking. So this is pretty specific. They're talking about 40 alumni training a group of middle school girls. It's definitely measurable. If we chat 6 months after the grant has started, we can measure that. It's a year-round program. They have a number of contact hours. We can kind of see where they're at. It certainly seems attainable over the 18-month period. Seems realistic, and there is somewhat of a timeline associated with this. I know that it's a year-round program. So let's do a little test of your knowledge here. In a moment, not yet, but in a moment, we're going to put up a poll if you'd like to participate. I'd like you to look at these 3 SMART goals. Which SMART goal gives the most accurate and measurable understanding of a project scope? And again, we are looking for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So when you look at these 3 goals, which one would you choose? and we're going to put a poll up. All right, when you're ready, go ahead and try and answer the poll if you would, please. All right, I'm hearing that y'all can't see the poll.
They don't see that. No, they see the poll, they just can't see the answer.
Oh,
So
okay.
you're gonna
All
need
right.
to read it.
We're a little new at polls. Thanks for your patience with us. I'm going to read these out. So SMART Goal 1 says is A, the Wildlife Watcher program will engage Smith Elementary students in stewardship of the outdoors and inspire healthy lifestyles by visiting 30 state parks. So is that specific? Is it measurable? Is it realistic and attainable? And is there some type of time-bound element to that? B says all outdoors will host a 4-day, 3-night family camping adventure during spring break at Cedar Hill State Park for 25 families from the Autism United Parents Group, leading guided sensory hikes and basic campsite setup to increase confidence in safely spending time in nature. And then the last one, C, youth will successfully participate in the Shoot Safe Archery program by attending mentored practice sessions, participating in competitions, learning teamwork, and increasing archery skills. So you have 3 goals, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and choose which one gives the most accurate and measurable understanding in that SMART goal format. All right, give everyone just another minute. How many people have participated? Okay. All right. Well, if you struggled with that one a little, you're not alone. All 3 of those are certainly good goals that describe a project. But in that SMART goal format, we are looking for something very specific with a measurable outcome that we know is realistic and has some type of time-bound element to it. So for A, if you were thinking about that one, I would challenge you to really think about, is it realistic for all those students to visit 30 state parks? That's kind of a tough one. I wouldn't say that's super realistic. It doesn't tell us the number of students, and it's hard to measure if you're increasing stewardship or healthy lifestyles of the students. If we're looking at C, the outcomes don't really include any deliverables. It's very general. It's difficult to assess any outcomes. I don't know how many practice sessions they're attending, whether they're all participating in competitions. If they said they were attending monthly practice sessions and 10 competitions, again, we really want those numeric elements in your SMART goal. But if you were thinking about choosing B, hosting a 4-day, 3-night family camping adventure during spring break, that hits those specific, measurable 25 families from the Autism United Parent Group. And it does seem realistic and attainable. So this is kind of a good practice on identifying some of these SMART goals. So the answer here hopefully was B. And again, I encourage you to use that SMART goal handout as you are writing those in your application. So the next application element we're going to look at is aligned with those SMART goals. This is the project narrative. So the project narrative is where a lot of your scoring elements are found. Think about all the details that are included in your proposal. This is where you're including them. So in the application, you'll see several questions and try to address all of them if you can. Kind of the who, what, where, when, and why. So who is the population that you're serving? Is it different at different times of year? Do you have partnerships? When are your activities going to take place? Where and what types of activities? The length of events is important. We certainly score things differently if it's a 1 hour event versus 4 events that are full day programs. So the length of the event or number of contact hours for your activities, very important. As Carly mentioned earlier, we prioritize quality over quantity. So the frequency, is this a one-time activity? How many are engaged in multiple activities? Are you working with 20 kids twice a month over the entire school year? Or are you working with 20 kids for a couple of hours? So how many families or students or participants are engaged in multiple activities? And then you also want to address some of your risk management and training. COVID can certainly be a potential issue. I'm unsure if this is still going to be an issue by the grant award, but you can talk about potential backup plans if you think that might affect your program. How will your program deal with bad weather if it's canceled? How will staff members receive training? Will they have training in first aid or lifeguarding or wilderness first responder? So the risk management and the training of your staff are important to address. And we also ask if there's any leadership development in the proposal that you're writing. It's not required and it's not necessary, but you could have an element on careers. You could be developing outdoor leaders or interns or through your volunteers. This could include like counselors in training. It could include talking about natural resource careers or mentoring over time, or if any of your participants will receive any type of advanced training. Some examples might include if your participants are getting certified in boater education, or if your staff members are completing a hunter education instructor class, and then as an instructor, they're teaching hunter education to other staff or volunteers or participants, that would meet that leadership development question. And we're also asking about outdoor service projects. Again, this is not a required element. For some people, this is their whole project that they're proposing, a service projects. We'll say that it's best when participants are engaged in the planning of a service project, the implementation, the evaluation, they understand the impact of the service project. It really should be related to conservation and natural resources, but you want to include how many are involved, the number of contact hours, and it needs to be somewhat developed. So this project narrative piece, you want to include as much information from these questions on the application as possible. Try to be as clear as you can, try to be as concise as you can. Make sure that you're looking at the SMART goals that you wrote in the previous section and that these are aligned. Make sure that you have a risk management plan and kind of a backup plan if your events don't go as planned. What we really don't need here are quotes from research or articles to justify why you're doing your program. You really don't need to include any type of additional activities that are outside of the scope of your program or activities from the past. So there are some tips in here to include and to not include, but essentially for your narrative, it's that who, what, where, when, and why. All right, we're gonna do another poll. We're gonna look at a sentence from a sample narrative and see what could be added to this narrative to better understand the scope of a program. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of read it with you. Where it says, number 1, this is a sample sentence from a narrative. The program will provide novice hunters several opportunities to participate in hunts for dove, turkey, and deer. So if we go back to that narrative, remember, we're looking for a lot of details. So what could you add to this? A says you could include more details about who the hunters are and how many will participate. You can include a full agenda for each day with menus of all the meals they're serving and more details about the cabins that the hunters are staying at. You could include details of where and when the hunts will take place and how many trips each hunter will participate in. And then your last choice is both A and C would help better understand the scope of your program. So we'll put up that poll now. Let me know what you think, A, B, C, or D. All right, give you just another minute. We got about half have voted. Anyone else want to take a stab? All right, it's kind of tallying up here. All right, let's take a look at the results. All right. Interesting. All right. Hey, you guys did pretty well. Let's maybe take a look at some of these again. So we'll take down our poll, look at this together, and remember that the narrative, I go back one slide here, it's who are you serving, what activities will take place, when and where, how long it will last, how frequently are they engaged, your risk management, natural career resource, or outdoor service projects. Now, you're not going to address every single one of those in a sentence, but if I'm looking at this sentence, the program will provide novice hunters several opportunities to participate in hunts for dove, turkey, and deer. If I include more details about who the hunters are and how many will participate. So if I said 15 novice female hunters from inner city Houston will participate in 3 weekend hunting events. That gives us and our committee a much clearer picture of what you're proposing in that narrative. So B says include a full agenda for each day, menus of meals served, and more details about the cabins. Does this provide the details we really need to understand the scope of your program? If I know that they're going to have brisket for dinner and pancakes for breakfast, what I really want to know is kind of the who and the what and the why and the where and the when. So if we go to C, including details of where and when the hunt will take place and how many trips that hunters will participate in. If I said the hunters will travel to South Llano River State Park for a fall dove hunt, and to private land in West Texas for a deer and turkey hunt. That gives me a much clearer picture in your narrative of what you're proposing, of how many trips each hunter will participate in. So really, I think most of you got this. The best answer here would be D. And if I take that initial sentence and put them all together and say 15 novice female hunters from inner city Houston will participate in 3 weekend hunting events, traveling to South Llano River State Park for a fall dove hunt and to private land in West Texas for a winter deer and turkey hunt. That is much more descriptive, and it's hitting a lot more of those bullet points that we're looking for in your narrative. Again, you want to be clear, concise, and you want to hit that who, what, where, when, and why. So I hope that was helpful for your narrative practice. All right, moving on. As Carly mentioned earlier, one of the requirements of the co-op grant is that you have some type of direct relationship with Texas Parks and Wildlife. It's a priority of the grant. All your grant activities don't need to be held at state parks or incorporate TPWD resources, but you have to have some type of direct relationship, and that can be visiting facilities, not just state parks, but we also have wildlife management areas, we have fisheries, we have training and certification programs for your staff or participants. That could be angler education program or hunter education program, Project Wild certification for your staff or certification as an instructor, and some other TPWD education and curriculum programs. Or if your participants are working directly with TPWD personnel, not volunteers, but whether that's park staff, maybe you're having a game warden come out and talk about hunting ethics, maybe you're having an urban biologist come out and talk about different tracking data. We do require commitment letters for some of the programs. You have to have these included in your application. The Texas Outdoor Family Program they do have very limited capacity, as well as our Buffalo Soldier Heritage Outreach Program. They travel all over the state. So if you are planning to integrate those 2 resources into your proposal, you'll need to reach out to them before you submit your application and ask for a commitment letter. The same goes for TPWD staff that you say are going to be directly involved in your program. So if you are saying that a game warden is going to come out and talk about careers or hunting ethics in your proposed program, you need to have a letter of commitment from that game warden. Now, we do have other programs. Those commitment letters are not required, but they certainly are recommended. If you are planning to have your group all take archery training, you may want to reach out to one of our archery coordinators before you submit your application and learn a little more about that, how long it lasts and when they might offer it. That would be very helpful for the quality of your program. Just real quick, this is just a very quick glimpse at some of the resources that are approved for the co-op grant. Again, you have in your handouts a brand new document that also includes links and contact information for all of the approved programs, and where it's applicable, we also include cost. So if you're not sure how much Project Wild costs, you can find it in that handout. If you're not sure how much one of our other programs costs or if it's free, you can also find that there. Of course, each of the state parks has their own different cost for day passes or camping, but you can find that contact information in there as well. So I encourage you all to use those co-op resources to help you plan for your costs and your budget. Check the dates, that will help out your timeline, because you are accountable for your commitment and reaching out to those programs and staff that you are including in your proposal. All right, our proposed project details. So thus far, we've had the name of our project, we've given a quick little summary, we have written some SMART goals that outline the deliverables of our project. We've written our narrative, which includes all those details. And the next part of the application is asking for a timeline. So remember that our awards are announced in March. So the period of performance is from March 1st to the following September. So the grant period is an 18-month period. We do want you to be very realistic about spring programs, unless it's a program you've done many, many times. Those spring programs that happen in March, if you're not sure whether or not you're going to receive funding from the grant, you do need time to organize, to recruit, to really put all that together. So make sure you're realistic in your timeline. Remember that special events are not allowed. So in your timeline, we shouldn't see like an Earth Day or festivals or anything that's open to the general public. We don't want you to include planning time or meetings that might be happening. What we're really looking for in this timeline is, show us that what you have is somewhat developed with some tentative dates, some tentative locations, and then what type of activity. You don't necessarily have to tell us that you are going to Sea Center, Texas on December 1st. You can tell us it's in the fall. You can tell us it's in December. You can tell us you're not sure what state park you're going to, but it's going to be a West Texas state park. But we're just looking to see that you have a developed idea of your timeline. We also encourage you to upload an itinerary, which is optional, but it can give our review committee a much deeper insight into the depth of experience of your participants. That is very helpful. It's optional, but you have room here in the application to upload an agenda, an itinerary, or a sample if you'd like to share that with us. All right, let's talk a little bit about your project participants. So when we're talking about participants, we are talking about unduplicated. So you may have participants that attend multiple events and activities, but what you're reporting in this section of your application, they're only counted once. So you want to make sure you're being conservative. This number, this amount, it will transfer to your grant agreement if you're awarded the grant. You also need to provide an explanation of how you calculated this. It could be on past programs that you've done. It could be you're working with a partner organization and their membership or program. But you want to make sure you're providing an explanation of how you've come up with that number. And we encourage you to be conservative. It's always better to exceed the number than to not meet the number of participants that you have stated you will serve in your grant agreement. As you're thinking about your participants, there is a very important section in the application on demographics. The priority and purpose of the Co-op Grant Award is to reach underserved audience and to diversify those audience that are engaged with Texas parks and wildlife. So this is worth about 30% of the scoring. So this is a really important section. You can see we define several of these demographics. We have racial and ethnic minorities, females, low income, which is defined by the free and reduced school lunch program or poverty guidelines. And then we also have individuals with a disability. Now, this could be inclusive to behavioral, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and you're also including the caretakers or family. So if you're having a kayaking event for 10 wheelchair-bound participants, and they each come with their caretaker, so you have 20 total. You have 10 folks that are kayaking in the wheelchairs, and then you have 10 of their caretakers, so that's 20. So how do you collect this demographic data? It's very important to understand that we do not allow census data, zip code data, or neighborhood data. And that's because if you're reporting with just general census data, that really doesn't document that you are serving exactly what's listed in the census data. So what we highly recommend, you can use past program demographic data if you have it. You can partner. So if you're partnering with a school, you can use their data, sometimes called PEAMS data. But you have to report on who you are actually serving and not on a general estimate for a whole school. So if you are running an after-school program with 50 kids and you're using data from a school that serves 3,000 kids, that may not be as accurate. We have no guarantee that those 50 kids you're working with are the same that are represented out of the 3,000. So you have to have a method to collect the data yourself. Just being or working with a Title I school is not enough documentation for the demographic that you're actually serving. So some other ways that you might want to think about collecting this data, again, you can use partners who collect this information. So the Boys and Girls Club or schools or another nonprofit that you're partnering with. You can also use self-reported data from individuals that are expected to participate. So if you had like an online or paper registration form where they can self-report that data, but be aware that some folks are not comfortable reporting low income or a disability. So let's look at what's needed on the actual application. But again, I just want to stress you have to have a way to generate demographic data. So on the actual application, you can see they're asking for a breakout of participant demographics, right? Again, do not use census data or zip code data or neighborhood data. So if your mission is to serve a specific population, then you would justify your demographic data here in these boxes. And then we're also asking about how you plan to recruit some of those folks to ensure attendance. If you are awarded a grant, you are required to report the demographics for the actual participants that you've served. So again, you have to have a method of collecting that demographic data specific to those individuals who participate in your program. Maybe that's a registration form or a survey or a partner collecting that type of data. If you're not able to collect data for a certain demographic, so let's say you don't really collect information or know how many of your participants have a disability, then just leave that 0 in the application. So we have very few, if any, applicants hitting each one of these boxes. That is not our intention, that 100% of your participants are female or low income. And you may have participants that meet more than one of these. You may have females who are Hispanic or Asian. So you may have some participants that meet more than one of these demographics. So again, if you don't have the means to collect this information or you're just not sure, we recommend that you just put 0 in a demographic category for percentage of total participants. Very few projects receive all the points in all 4 categories, and that really is not our expectation either. You will still be competitive if the majority of your participants fall into just 1 or 2 of these demographic categories. So if you have questions about this section of your application, Carly's answering questions live right now, but we'll have our contact information put up at the end, and you can always reach out to us as you're filling out this section of your application, and we can kind of help you narrow this down a little bit and make sure that you have the right information. All right, last but not least is the project budget. And I want to be very upfront. The budget for your project can take some time. This section does take a little while. You want to use the co-op program guidance that's included in your handout to make sure you really understand what's allowed and what's disallowed. So for example, if you put advertising, commercials, let's say advertisements on social media in your budget, and that's $1,000, we do not allow advertising as part of a grant expense. So we would remove that expense, and that amount would be reduced from your total award. So you want to make sure you're very familiar with both allowed and ineligible expenses. It's really important that you are consistent and your budget is aligned with the project that you've described in your SMART goals, in your narrative, describing your participants. So it's important to really review those and make sure that everything is consistent and aligned. So we have a couple different categories here. It is an itemized budget. It's for personnel. You need to make sure that any personnel that you are asking for funding under the grant, they need to be directly related to the project, and they should be included in that key personnel section at the beginning of the application. So if your executive director is out there at your summer day camp engaging with campers, or they're on site, then they have a direct link to your project. But if your executive director's primary responsibilities are more administrative and dealing with your board, we would not recommend that you ask for the personnel cost. Personnel would be anyone directly related to your project. It is okay to ask for personnel that are not yet hired, as long as they're listed in the key personnel at the beginning. I also want to mention that we do require timesheets for all employees. If you don't use timesheets, we have some templates that we can supply you, but when you're asking for reimbursement costs of personnel, or if you have an advance and you're providing documentation, we do require timesheets to document the cost of your personnel. For food and travel, you want to make sure you're using the federal mileage rate. We do cover costs of transportation and vehicle rental, but you can also ask for mileage, which is using the IRS mileage rate. We do cover any type of fees or liability insurance, but you can't pay fees to yourself. So if there is a fee for your summer camp, we're not going to award those fees directly to you, even in the form of a scholarship. But if there are fees to enter a park, or a fee for kayak rental, or a fee to an aquarium, we do cover those types of fees under that fee budget line. You'll also see a budget line for service projects and a budget line for supplies. You don't need to itemize every single line. You can use some general categories. So if you used a general category like kayaking supplies, that would cover your paddles, your life jackets, and any other supplies that go along with kayaking. Same with fishing. You don't need to individually write hooks and sinkers and tackle and line. You can just write fishing supplies, and all of those items would fall under your budget line for fishing supplies. Now, we don't want you to just put education supplies. That's pretty general. Our auditors definitely look for something a little more specific. So remember that we're going to disallow any funding for any ineligible items that are listed on this budget. And it's important to remember that that dollar amount will be deducted from what you're requesting, and we can't add that back in. So make sure you really do understand the allowable items and ineligible expenses. And again, and if you have a lot of questions about the budget, we do include a sample budget and a budget template in with our resources, so you can even look at a sample budget as you're creating your own. Let's see. Oh, just a couple other tips. As you're doing this in our recreation grant system, that system does time out. And from personal experience, I want to encourage you to save often, because as you're entering items into your budget, again, this section can take a while. I just want to encourage you to consistently save your work as you're going along. So again, that final reminder, please budget a lot of time to complete this section in the Argo system. It does take a little while to enter all of these items. All right, one last poll, and we're winding up this section of the application, but we're going to do one more poll, real simple, true or false. So number one, all staff funded by grant money in your budget are required to submit a timesheet to document reimbursement costs. Okay, so go ahead and do true or false. We're going to put up the poll. All staff funded by grant money in your budget are required to submit a timesheet to document reimbursement costs. All right, it's rolling. I think y'all are doing pretty darn well on this one. We're still collecting some responses. There's a lot of you on today. I think we have folks all the way from Amarillo, Aransas Pass. I know we have some folks from East Texas. All right, let's see how we did. I'm going to show you the answer. 94% of you are correct. So that statement is true. All personnel must be directly related to the project. They should be included in the key personnel section. And yes, timesheets are required for all employees. And again, if that's not something you use in your organization, we can provide you with a template. All right, last question. We'll see if you're really paying attention because Carly talked about this at the very beginning. Items such as backpacks, tents, and binoculars that will be given directly to participants to keep should be listed under the equipment and supplies section in your budget. All right, last poll question. True or false? Items such as backpacks, tents, and binoculars that are given to your participants to keep should be listed under the equipment and supplies section. True or false? All right, we have a lot of answers rolling in. This is a tricky one. This is a tricky one. All right, got a couple more answers rolling in. Different opinions on this one. Still collecting a few answers. One part of this statement is true, but also look at the whole sentence. All right, let's take a look, see how we answered. All right, like I said, this was a tricky one. This is false because if you remember, and if you're familiar with eligible and ineligible expenses, we do not fund items that are given directly to participants to keep. So you could not purchase a backpack or pair of binoculars or a tent that is given directly to participants. So if backpacks and tents and binoculars are purchased, we would fund those as part of your overall program. And they would go under the equipment and supplies section, okay? But the only items that we will fund are safety type of items to be given directly to participants. So this might be flashlights or water bottles or cooling towels. Anything associated with safety can be given directly to a participant, but things like a tent or a pair of binoculars, we would not fund that to be given directly to a participant to keep. That would stay with your program. All right, good job, y'all, good job. So we have made it to the end of our program. And all right, we are closing down that poll, but sorry, got a little technical help here. We're gonna move into our application checklist. Our application checklist, last slide of the program. All right. So I have tried to walk you through some of the biggest parts of the application, specifically your project description, trying to give you some best practices and tips. I hope that has made this a good investment of your time to kind of get some best practices and samples and talk about this as you get ready to submit your application. Things that you can do right now, right? The application doesn't open until Monday, but you can go in and create your Argo account. You can start today by getting your authorizing resolution document from your organization. Take a look at our TPWD relationship document and make sure you have at least one of those. And I do encourage you, whether the program you're working with requires a letter of commitment or not, you can always include a letter of commitment, even if it's not required. But reach out to, the fisheries or the wildlife management area. Ask them, about their availability or specific costs. So make sure you read that program guidance. Make sure you have everybody you need on your organizational account. We want to encourage you to plan conservatively, right? Over deliver, under promise maybe. Be consistent throughout your application. It's always a good idea to have someone else review your application. And at any time, both Carly and myself are here for guidance. You can send us an email, pick up the phone. We're happy to talk with you about a project that you have in mind. Kind of talk with you about, is it competitive? What elements might be eligible for funding and which might not. So we are here to be resources for you. And I want to make sure y'all have our contact information, which is here. And again, we uploaded a copy of all our slides, so you don't necessarily have to write all this down. You can just download the slides. And the last part of our workshop today is really to hear from you and see if there are any burning questions that you might have that we can try and answer for you. We've had several questions already asked and answered in the question section. Let's see if we have any questions coming in.
All right, we have a question. I'll just go ahead and read these off instead of replying in the chat about where can we find a list of course offerings for our instructors through TPWD. So that I would recommend going to our website, and you can actually go to that approved TPWD resource document that we've provided in the handout section, or it's in our Argo resource section. You can go there and find specific information about the program, but we also have a link to that particular part of the website. So you could use that, and then a lot of those events are listed on the website. I'll say that if you're applying now, the event that is going to be for 6 to 12 months from now may not be listed on their website. So you may not know exact dates of events, but that's fine, because in your timeline, you would just know, roughly in the spring we're going to be doing this or something like that. But that will actually bring you to the website so you can look more and see what types of specific classes are offered. So let's say for angler education, you can see what types of angling educational courses are offered for that program. But that document also lists all the contact information for that particular education program as well. I will be upfront that our website is not the most user-friendly for trying to navigate and finding them just from going directly to the TPWD website. So those links in that resource document may be a little bit easier to navigate for that particular program. And I'll also say, if you have any trouble finding resources or just want some general information about how the program works, feel free to reach out to Jessica and myself, and we can walk you through all of that, or even make the connection with a person who runs that program to put you guys into contact. So feel free to reach out to us, and also refer to that resource document for TPWD relationships. There's also a question on how do we get Parks and Wildlife staff participation when many do not reply to emails. I'll say that our staff are super busy right now. Just like many of the other organizations that exist out there, we have had a lot of turnover and just a lot of positions filled, but a lot of people requesting assistance for outreach. And people are really wanting programs now, so our staff are stretched thin. So please be patient with our staff, especially at parks and with our education programs. They're doing the best they can. If you are having a really hard time trying to get in touch with one particular person or one program, reach out to Jessica and myself, and we can try to bridge that connection with you. But a lot of these programs will respond, but it depends on the program. And again, we have a lot of staff turnover happening right now within our agency. So somebody else is asking if 100% of the grant funding can be used for gear, or does there need to be a certain percentage allocated for personnel? You can do that breakout however you decide. So I'll say that there used to be a requirement that no more than 40% of your requests could be for personnel. We got rid of that requirement a few years back. So now if you want 100% of your grant request to be for personnel, that is allowed. If you want 100% of your request to be for gear and supplies and equipment, that is absolutely allowed. If you want to break it up to where 20,000 is for personnel and 40,000 is for gear and 10,000 is for food and travel, that's totally up to you. Just remember that you have to apply for at least $5,000 in funding, and you cannot exceed $70,000 for your request. But you can break it up as far as how much you're requesting for each item, however you wish. There's no sort of cap on percents on any particular category on the budget. Let's see what else we have here. So somebody is with a Master Naturalist chapter group, and they're asking if that qualifies as a TPWD contact. If you're having your Master Naturalist lead a program, so the Master Naturalist volunteers are serving in the Master Naturalist role as part of the program, then that will count as that connection. So just keep that in mind. But I think I might need a little bit more clarification on what you might be asking as far as Master Naturalists. But if your Master Naturalists are either the ones running events or are the ones acting as participants, and they are serving in the role of a Master Naturalist as that volunteer position, then that would be considered the direct relationship to TPWD. So somebody is asking, can it be anyone in the department? I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to.
If you're referring to TPWD staff, then my answer would be yes. It could be any TPWD staff that are working directly with your participants. It cannot be just like a park host or a park volunteer. It needs to be more of a direct connection.
I'll also add that Jessica and myself do not count as that staff member for you, so you may have reached out to us or one of our other grant programs. Some people ask, well, I have an archery grant program, so can't that count as my TPWD relationship? Unfortunately, that will not count either. That's not one of the approved relationships. So just because you received a local park grant or a trails grant or a target range grant, that does not count as that relationship. We're really talking more about those education and outreach programs or the visiting those facilities that are owned and operated by Parks and Wildlife. We have a lot of projects who have staff come out in a variety of capacities. It doesn't have to be our education and outreach staff. We've had projects who have had members of our HR team come out and do a presentation or do a round robin circle with participants talking about how to, or talking about careers or certification programs that don't require a specific environmental career. So we've had HR staff come talk to people. I'll say that our staff is very busy, so keep that in mind too, that may not be available. We have game wardens coming out to talk to participants. We have biologists coming out to talk to participants, and we do have a section on our website where you can actually find who your local biologist would be for a particular area. We have our education and outreach staff who are available. We have park interpreters. So there's a lot of different types of staff who are available. Just keep in mind that if that is your direct relationship, we want to make sure you're not just Googling who that person is and saying they're going to commit. we are requiring a commitment letter from that individual saying, yes, I will participate in your program. And that's again to show that they have buy-in and that they have agreed to help you out. Also keep in mind that our staff are incredibly busy right now. Like I said earlier, we're short-staffed like everybody else in the world right now. So they may not be able to assist you if you request that. Make sure you ask for that letter, and do not ask for that letter the day before you need it. Ask for that letter several weeks before or right now if you know that you want to have that person, because they might not be able to turn that around for you in a couple of days. They may need longer time because a lot of our staff are in the field most of the time, and so they're not always checking their email right away. So just make sure you leave a lot of buffer and room for that staff commitment letter, and just be patient with our staff because everybody is just overwhelmed and really busy right now. Let's see what other questions we have. So somebody's asking, will we receive more points for visiting more than one TPWD park? Not necessarily. Our scoring criteria is evaluating the quality of that TPWD relationship. So we have some projects who are visiting one park, but their participants are there for 4 days. That's a really in-depth experience for those participants to be there for a weekend or 4 days or a week. So that would be a really quality, in-depth experience for those participants, even though they just went to one park. You could have a project that different participants are going to 5 different state parks, but they're only there for an hour. That might not be as in-depth of an experience because one participant only went to one park, even though different participants went to multiple ones. So again, we're really putting more focus on quality rather than quantity. So it really depends on the project that you're applying for. Again, you don't need to meet all of those different priorities, and you don't need to meet all of those different TPWD relationships to score well with this particular program. And I'll say that's not flat across the board for all programs. Everybody applying for this grant program has such a diverse array of programs and project structures that they're applying for. It's hard for me to tell you that yes, that would be competitive, or no, that wouldn't. You're also competing against the different projects that apply for that particular year. So one project that applied for one thing in 1 year may be, if you're applying again the next year, it may not score the exact same because we're comparing that to other people who applied, or you may have scored the same but may not have got a grant in 1 year versus the other because 1 year had some really competitive programs. It all depends from year to year. So somebody's asking if we were interested in training staff to then teach programs throughout the year, where are the training programs located?
I can answer that
All
one. We revised our resource document that's included in your handouts, and I believe it's the 3rd page in there has a full list of all of the instructor and certification and like staff training type of programs that we have. In that document, there are clickable links and contact information. I will say some programs, if they have the ability, like Project Wild, if you have 20 staff members that you're looking to gain Project Wild certification and they're able to accommodate, they can come to your site and do a Project Wild training for your staff. Now, if you had 2 staff members and maybe you lived fairly rural, they may not be able to accommodate that. They do have all of the current trainings available, usually on our calendar. So if you go to the TPWD website and you click on calendar, you can see the angler education instructor classes that are being held across the state. You can see hunter education being held across the state. I will say, as a general statement, A lot of those classes are held closer to the urban areas of DFW and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, perhaps in the Valley. They do make an effort to try and get out to maybe West Texas. So, and we also don't have those classes listed a year out. So when you're writing your grant, you may not know if there's going to be an instructor class near you. My best advice is to use that contact information that we've provided. Reach out to our archery instructor, our angler ed coordinator, and let them know I'm applying for a co-op grant. I have 10 staff members in Amarillo that I would love to go through staff training. Do you think you might have anything being offered, in the spring of next year or in the fall? They may be willing to come to you if we can, maybe you can work with them and bring in some other partner organizations so they have a large enough participant base to, really make it worthwhile for them to travel out there. And maybe they can add you to their calendar. I've seen that as well, where they know that there's some folks in an area that would like to go through that training, and they work with you and plan that. But my best advice to you, if you're not near an urban area, is to just reach out to the coordinators of those programs and let them know that you have interest. And that's what they're there for, especially because our grant is over an 18-month period. So you can give them enough notice that hopefully they can try and accommodate you.
All right, and we have another question asking, are hunter education instructors considered TPWD contacts for relationship purposes? So if you're referring to volunteers who are providing a hunter education class, they wouldn't count as a TPWD staff member as far as relationship. However, if they are actually teaching TPWD's hunter education curriculum, they're a volunteer teaching that hunter education curriculum to your participants, then that would actually count as using the hunter education program. So a lot of those programs are train the trainer programs, how we call them. And so essentially one of your staff members might get certified in that, and then your staff member then would teach your, teach your participants those hunter education principles. That is how that program operates. And so you'd be using the hunter education, the program in that way. If your staff or your participants are attending a hunter education class that's taught by a local volunteer, again, because this is train the trainer, then that would be considered using the hunter education program of Texas Parks and Wildlife. So absolutely. I'll also say if your program is just teaching general angling education, but it's not related to using TPWD's angler education curriculum, that's not really using the TPWD angler education program. So that wouldn't really count. You would need to either send your staff to one of those programs for training, or demonstrate that somebody has attended in the past and you're using that specific curriculum that we provide into your program with participants. So just keep that in mind.
And I would add something that we occasionally see is, well, one of our staff members in their spare time is a hunter education instructor. So that really is not a relationship with TPWD just because they have that certification. Unless they're directly teaching and working with your participants, that is not a relationship that's eligible for this grant. Same thing if one of your staff members happens to be a master naturalist, or let's say you're doing a dove hunt and one of your mentors happens to be a hunter ed instructor. Unless they're actually teaching the hunter ed curriculum, just because they're on site with your participants doesn't necessarily mean that that establishes a relationship. You really need to look at the purpose of our grant is to connect underrepresented audiences with our agency's resources. So, you need to think about how competitive and how strong that relationship is on your application.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go further
Yeah.
into one of your examples with the master naturalist. Just because one of your staff members is a master naturalist, again, doesn't mean that that's automatically that connection there, unless they're serving actually in that master naturalist role. So with master naturalist programs, master naturalists are required to report their hours in that position to TPWD's agency. So let's say if a master naturalist is leading a program, as far in their master naturalist capacity, they're required to report those volunteer hours to the agency. But if they just happen to be a master naturalist and they're not serving in that capacity as a master naturalist leading that program, and they're not reporting their hours, then they would not be, that wouldn't really be the connection there.
Good questions.
And that's the end of our questions. We're going to leave it open for another minute or so in case there's any questions, but I just want to add a few other things that, like we said earlier, this is a very competitive grant program. We wish we could fund everybody that applied, but unfortunately we cannot. Sometimes we can only fund half or 60% of the people apply. So if you apply to the grant program and don't get funded, please don't get discouraged. It's not reflective of your particular project. Sometimes it's just we don't have enough funding to support everybody. If you do not receive grant funds, then you do have the option of requesting an application critique. And we will tell you exactly how you scored in each specific area. And then we can also meet with you to review that evaluation and recommend some ways that maybe it'd be a little bit more competitive in the future. So if you don't get a grant, please don't get discouraged. We just can't support everybody, and I highly recommend requesting that application critique. We have many, many grantees who come in and don't get it their first year. They've requested a critique, and then they come back in the next year and they are competitive. So just keep that in mind. I also want to remind you that this webinar has been recorded. So if you want to go refer to anything that we had mentioned earlier, this will be in the resources section of our Argo system. So it will be located there. And I also want to encourage you to reach out to Jessica and myself. We are not able to actually review sections of or your entire proposal before you submit it and give you feedback. That is not fair to all of the other applicants out there. But if you want to just generally discuss your program to us or ask a specific question on if this would be eligible, or just general terms, would this be a semi-competitive project or not, Jessica and myself can absolutely have those conversations with you. So if you do have any questions, I highly recommend that you reach out to us either by email or by phone call, and we can just answer those questions for you. We want to make sure that people aren't just wasting their time if they know that the project just doesn't really align with what we're looking for right off the bat. So again, encourage you to reach out to us, use the resources we provided, look over that program guidance. That it's long, but it has a lot of information in there and can often answer many of your questions. And then if you have any sort of problems with technical guidance, we have Blake Powers on staff. He is our systems administrator. He's been sitting in the background the whole time in this webinar, helping us out with technical issues. He'll help you create accounts in the system. He'll help you with any sort of technical issues you're having with recreation grants online. I know everybody is not as technically savvy as other people, and don't worry about that. We don't want that to be a barrier. We'll help you out. This is unlike many of maybe foundation grants where they say don't contact us. We encourage you to contact us. This is our job. We may just be a two-person team, but we want to help you out, and we want to ensure you have the most competitive grant project moving forward. So I don't see any more questions in the question box. So with that, if you do have any more questions, you can email us directly. And with that, we want to thank you so much for attending our workshop. That's 2 hours and 40 minutes, so we didn't make you sit here for the full 3 hours. But thank you so much for attending, and good luck on your application writing.